The moment the CEO's son walked into our operations center wearing a $1,000 suit and talking about innovation, I knew the airline was going to crash long before any plane ever did. I had spent 11 years keeping that company alive with caffeine, sleepless nights, and pure stubbornness. Meanwhile, people like him drifted through life believing an MBA and a fake, confident smile made them smarter than the people actually doing the work. What he did not understand was simple. Airlines do not run on branding. They run on tired people quietly stopping disasters every single hour of the day. My name is Natalie Brooks, and for more than a decade I worked as the operations lead for a regional airline based in New York. The title sounded important, but really it meant I spent my life inside a freezing room full of monitors, radios, and angry phone calls, trying to stop chaos from spreading across the country. While passengers complained about delayed flights and stale pretzels, people like me were rerouting aircraft around storms, fixing scheduling disasters, and keeping pilots from timing out in the middle of a shift. The entire company depended on a system called Skybridge, an ancient piece of software held together by outdated code and unofficial patches that only a few of us understood. Most importantly, I understood it better than anyone alive. Every morning started the same way: bad coffee, flickering screens, and a dozen small disasters already waiting for me before sunrise. On that particular Tuesday, I walked into operations at 4 in the morning and immediately saw warning alerts flashing across the routing server. Storms were moving through the Carolinas. Boston ground crews were delayed, and Chicago was already backing up with cancellations. My supervisor, Frank, looked exhausted while eating a breakfast sandwich that smelled like burned rubber. "Morning, Natalie," he muttered. "We are getting hammered already." I sat down and started typing before he even finished talking. Within minutes, I rerouted flights around the storms, manually patched a server lag, and reassigned 2 crews that would have timed out before landing. The alerts disappeared one by one until the screens finally turned green again. That feeling always gave me a strange kind of pride. Most passengers would never know my name, but hundreds of flights were moving safely because of decisions I made before most people woke up. Around 9 that morning, the mood inside operations changed instantly when the doors opened. Expensive perfume replaced the usual smell of stale coffee and stress. In walked Ethan Mercer, the owner's son, with his fiancée, Vanessa, close behind him, holding a tablet like she was about to save the world. Ethan had spent years traveling through Europe pretending to discover himself while the rest of us worked overtime keeping the company alive. Now he suddenly had a new executive title and believed he was ready to modernize the airline. "Natalie," Ethan said with a polished smile that felt completely fake. "We are here to observe operations today. Dad thinks it is time for a fresh perspective." Fresh perspective usually means somebody important wants to fire experienced employees and replace them with software nobody tested, I replied. Vanessa laughed softly, like I was being dramatic. She used to be some kind of influencer before deciding aviation was her new passion. 5 clears throat minutes into operations, and she was already talking about streamlining systems and optimizing workflow, even though she clearly did not understand how anything actually worked. At noon, they called a boardroom meeting, and that was when I realized the company was truly in trouble. Ethan stood in front of a giant presentation talking about artificial intelligence, productivity, and cutting unnecessary staff. Vanessa clicked through colorful slides filled with buzzwords while middle managers sat silently, trying not to lose their jobs. Then Vanessa pointed at our Milwaukee routes and announced they planned to get rid of smaller aircraft and replace them with larger jets to reduce frequency and increase efficiency. I stared at her in disbelief. Those smaller aircraft existed because the runway at the secondary airport physically could not handle larger planes. On top of that, our business travelers depended on frequent departures. Cutting those flights would destroy the route financially within months. I explained all of that calmly, but Ethan brushed it aside with the confidence of someone who had never solved a real problem in his life. "That is outdated thinking, Natalie," he said. "We need scalable solutions." That was the moment I understood none of this was about improving the airline. It was about ego. They hated needing people like me because we reminded them they were not actually capable of running the business alone. Over the next 2 weeks, the company became unrecognizable. Experienced workers were fired one after another and replaced with automation tools that barely worked. The overnight support team was cut because Ethan claimed nothing important happened after midnight. Meanwhile, our cargo division operated through the night and made millions in revenue. Every warning I gave them was ignored. Vanessa started shadowing me during shifts, asking ridiculous questions while scrolling through social media. Because the codes explain why they are delayed, I answered while typing reroutes across 3 different airports. Mechanical delays, crew issues, weather problems, fuel shortages. Color coding will not tell me whether I need a mechanic or a miracle. She rolled her eyes and told me I needed a more positive attitude. That Friday, I got the meeting invitation from Human Resources. No subject line, no explanation. I already knew what was coming. Before leaving my desk, I quietly finished something I had been working on for days. Over the years, I had built hundreds of custom scripts that kept Skybridge working properly. They handled routing recovery, pilot scheduling, backups, and system synchronization during outages. Officially, they were considered personal workflow tools because it never properly integrated them. So, I moved every script into my secured employee directory. Completely legal, completely compliant. If my employee credentials disappeared, the scripts disappeared too. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into HR's. Ethan sat beside Vanessa, looking proud of himself, while the HR representative avoided eye contact completely. Ethan folded his hands together dramatically. Natalie, after reviewing operational culture, we feel your approach no longer aligns with the future vision of the company. Translation, I said coldly. You are firing the person who keeps the airline running. Vanessa jumped in immediately. Your negativity has become toxic for the workplace. I laughed out loud because it honestly sounded insane. 11 years of sacrificing holidays, sleep, and relationships for that airline. And suddenly, I was toxic because I questioned people who had no idea what they were doing. Ethan finally said the words, "You are terminated effective immediately." I handed over my ID badge without arguing. Then I looked directly at him. You think you bought a self-operating machine, Ethan? I told him quietly. But you fired the only person who knew how to drive it. As I walked out, I warned them the routing cache would refresh at 3:30. Ethan smirked and said it would handle it. I left the building, sat in a bar near the airport, and ordered tequila while watching public flight trackers on my phone. At exactly 3:30, the system refreshed and failed to reconnect to the routing architecture tied to my credentials. The collapse started slowly. One delayed flight became 5. 5 became 20. Then gate assignments vanished. Fuel schedules were corrupted. And crews disappeared from dispatch records. Within an hour, the FAA issued a ground stop. The airline froze completely. Passengers were stranded everywhere. News stations started reporting system-wide failures. My phone exploded with calls from operations staff begging for help. Ethan called 7 times. Vanessa texted me saying people were suffering and I needed to act professionally. I blocked both of them. Finally, the owner himself, Richard Mercer, called me personally. Unlike his son, Richard had actually built the airline from nothing decades earlier. He sounded exhausted. Natalie, this is a disaster, he admitted. Come back tonight and fix this. I will fire Ethan. I, clears throat, will fire Vanessa. Name your price. For a second, I thought about it. Part of me still loved the chaos of operations. But then I remembered every insult, every warning they ignored, every smug smile from people who believed experience no longer mattered. You let them destroy the company themselves, I said quietly. Now you have to live with it. The airline lost millions within days. Flights were canceled across the country. Investors panicked. Reporters uncovered the truth about my firing. And suddenly, every competitor in the industry knew my name. 2 days later, I accepted a consulting contract with one of our biggest rivals for nearly triple my old salary. They wanted my knowledge, not my obedience. I worked from home rebuilding their systems while watching my former airline collapse on television. A week later, Ethan was fired. 6 months later, the airline was sold off in pieces. Sometimes I still miss that operations center. I miss the flashing screens, the pressure, and the feeling of solving impossible problems before sunrise. But then I remember something important. Companies love to call workers replaceable, right until the moment they find out exactly how expensive replacement really is.